Rabbi Steven Weil to inspire us and to have us understand a little bit what we're experiencing today. It's also a chus for me to have the shir, the talk dedicated in my wife's memory to Rabbi Mitzvah. He should have lived in a long life. Sponsored by my brother-in-law Benji, Dr. Benjamin Levine, and his wife, and it should be good.
Good morning, everyone. Chag Sameach, happy Yom Yerushalayim. The talk of the Rabbanit Korn, please have in mind, Tobi Yehudit Bat Avraham Yitzchak. Tobi Yehudit Bat Avraham Yitzchak. You know, we celebrate Pesach, we celebrate Hanukkah, but in our lifetime, we experienced maybe a miracle, if not on par with Yetzias Mitzrayim and Hanukkah, then the greatest moment for the nation in over 2,000 years. And I don't want to start with what happened today in Yerushalayim. I actually want to go back to 1956, because you can't appreciate the story, the miracle of the modern Jewish people without them. They did a study in the 1970s. Who was the most recognized face on the planet Earth? On the globe, who was the most recognized face? You know who number one was? Muhammad Ali, the famous prize fighter. You know who number two was? The man with the patch, Moshe Dayan. By a show of hands, guys, who knows Moshe Dayan? Okay. How did he become so famous? In 1956, Israel was a small, tiny little sliver of land, 9 miles wide at its most narrow point. To the north, they couldn't export anything. You had Syria and Lebanon, blockade. To the east, its largest border, Jordan, you couldn't export or travel, blockade. To the south, Egypt, blockade. So Israel was trapped. What did they do? And your grandparents all participated in this. What they did was, let me thank you. Can everyone hear a little better now? How many of you, by show of hands, have heard Israel bonds? Okay. Your grandparents bought Israel bonds. The first Israel bonds, they never thought they'd see their money. Forget that they would ever see the interest. They never thought they'd get the principal back. Israel has never ever been late on a payment. What did they do with Israel bonds? In the north, they built, and it still exists today, a 24/7 dredging system. It's called the Haifa port, because Israel had to take its goods and had to be able to import and export. The second Israel bonds project, the Ashdod port. Again, a 24/7 dredging, because otherwise Haifa and Ashdod would look like Jaffa. You can't even go out in a rowboat in Jaffa. I mean, there's no deep sea port. So Israel had this ability. And in the south they had something off the Gulf of Aqaba known as the Eilat port. There was one nation on earth, you guys are not going to be able to believe this, the only nation on earth that would sell petroleum, that would provide energy for Israel, was Iran. Iran was under the Shah. It was before the revolution of 79 of the Ayatollah, before the Shia revolution. And how did that petroleum get to Israel? Just think about a map in your mind. You go from the Persian Gulf, right, to the Gulf of Aqaba. There's a very, very narrow straits, and we're going to mention this 10 times in this talk. The Straits of Tiran, T-I-R-A-N. You ever hear of the city Sharm el-Sheikh? Ask your parents if they know the song Sharm el-Sheikh. It's a city on the Straits of Tiran, and what would happen is Persian cargo vessels would go through there to Eilat, and that's how we had energy in Israel. 1956, this nightmare, this mistake, this black mark on Islam called the State of Israel, Egypt said, we're going to choke them off. We're going to shut down at the Straits of Tiran will shut down at Sharm el-Sheikh and prevent petroleum from coming into Israel. Now what would happen? Those ships would have to go all the way through the Indian Ocean, around the tip of Africa, coming around the Atlantic Ocean, through the Mediterranean. The cost of petroleum would have skyrocketed 300%. It would have destroyed this economy. Israel sent an expedition, led by the man with the patch. They went through the northern through the northern Sinai, through the southern Sinai, all the way, and with the backing, not militarily, but the support financially and in terms of weaponry, from France, and remember that name, France and England. Miraculously, they opened up the straits. And what was the response of the world? Absolute condemnation. And the ones who condemned Israel the worst was President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the United States. And he threatened an embargo on little Israel. The UN condemned, the whole world condemned. They condemned France and England for supporting them. Nobody condemned Egypt for preventing the Jewish nation for having the same rights that every nation on the globe had, the rights of maritime travel, of vessels to be able to bring in goods to Israel. That they didn't condemn, but they condemned Israel for opening up the straits. There was a South African immigrant, made Aliyah, a Jew from Johannesburg. His first name was Aubrey. Now, you're not going to make it in Israel if you have a name Aubrey. So he changed his name to Abba Ibn. If you YouTube him, you Google him, you'll see a lot about him. Abba Ibn negotiated one of the worst deals in Jewish history. Now, he thought at the time it was a fantastic deal. Who were the co-signers to this deal? The United Nations, America, England, and France. They were all going to guarantee the following. They're going to create something called the United Nations Emergency Forces, the UNEF. And what are the UNEF going to do? Get Moshe Dayan, get the Jews, get the Israelis out of Sinai, the southern Sinai, out of the northern Sinai, and out of the Gaza Strip. And we'll have a peacekeeping force, a multinational peacekeeping force. That'll be a buffer. So that way, Egypt can't complain that the Jews are on their land, and the Jews can't complain that the Egyptians are choking us off from the rights of every other nation. And he thinks he's done a wonderful thing. What was the mistake? In terms of the defense of the Jewish people, we rely on the Ribbono Shel Olam. Only the Ribbono Shel Olam should give us the IDF the ability to defend ourselves. You don't rely on a multinational force. But at least Israel has access to petroleum, and the economy can continue to grow. Remember, Israel at this point has literally doubled because of all of the refugees from North Africa, from the Arab lands in North Africa, from the Muslim lands in the Persian Gulf. So there's a population here, and there's an opportunity to grow now that we have access once again to petroleum. Leave 1956, I'm skipping now into the early 1960s. There was a former yeshiva bacher. He grew up in Ukraine with the last name Shkolnik. You're not going to make it in Israel with a name like Shkolnik. He changed his name to Levi Eshkol. He created something here in Israel called Hamovil Ha'artzi, the national water carrier. When you look at percentage of the gross national product of the economy, it was probably the greatest public works effort in all of history. Now, there's been many larger efforts in that, but not in terms of a project that took that much of the economy to make it happen. What was the national water carrier, Hamovil Ha'artzi? Israel only had one little source of natural water, the Kinneret. Most of the land that Israel had before 1967 was desert. 80% of it was desert. How are you going to be able to build a country? So what they did was, they had a whole piping system that the Arabs tried to sabotage. They had literally, the IDF had to be protecting it day and night as it was being built. Much of it was built underground. And it would take that natural water of the Kinneret and enable Jews to settle, to live, to expand and develop the country. While this is happening, the Syrians said, this stain, this nightmare is going to become a reality if we don't stop this. The Syrians, now how do you get water to the Kinneret? It comes from two sources. The Yarden, the Jordan, flowing into the Kinneret, and the Don flowing into the Jordan, which goes into the Kinneret. So at the Banyas and at the Chesbani, the Syrians started a project where they're going to dam up the Don River and dam up the Jordan River. We'll choke the freaking Jews. They won't have anything to drink. That was before modern technology of desalination plants. Well, at this point, Lady Eshkol is now the prime minister, the second prime minister in the history of the state of Israel. And the man who's the head of the IDF is Yitzhak Rabin. They send an expedition into Syria using aircraft, and they blow up the dams at the Chesbani, and they blow up the dams at the Banyas. Syrians want revenge. Sort of like the miracles that happened this week. You know, we took out the Iranian bases. They sent 20 Scuds at us. They sent 20 rockets at us. We took out more bases. So they came after the Jews, and there was a dogfight. Now, the dogfight's very important because the most powerful weapon in the whole Middle East was the Soviet MiG jet. The Syrian Air Force had Soviet MiG jets. Israel at that time, America did not sell that kind of weaponry. They did not sell offensive weaponry to Israel. You know what Israel had in its Air Force? The French Mystère, M-Y-S-T-E-R-E, the Mystère, and the French Mirage. A weaker, inferior jet to the MiG. A dogfight took place. Damascus, Syrian radio reported, government radio reported, we have shot down 8 Zionist jets. Now, maybe Israel shouldn't have done this. Who here at the Yeshiva, wherever you are in Simchas Torah, dances Hakafos, right? Hakafot. Everybody, okay? The IAF, with those French Mystères Mirages, you know, like on the bottom of the wing there's a Magen David. They decided to make Hakafot over the capital city of Damascus. So all the people in the street are out there, and they're looking up at these jets, and they're seeing the Magen David making hakafos. They realized their government lied to them. Syria was humiliated. While this is going on, skip to 1964. Today, Iran, thank God, thank the Ribbono Sholem, Iran is not nuclear, and they don't have the capacity yet. They're trying every day. They're developing ballistic missiles, ICBM technology, the Fahir, the Shahid, all these different missiles that they want to send. The Fahir, what's happening? They don't have it yet. So how are they trying to destroy Israel? They've got the Hamas done. Even though the Hamas are Sunnis, Muslim Brotherhood, they're funding them to attack Israel. They've got the Hezbollah with 120,000 rockets that we can take a Shvua Doraisa on, probably 150,000 rockets to our north. They've got Hezbollah. They've got a terrorist network on 5 capitals. All of you know what happened in Argentina. All of you know what happened in Sofia, Bulgaria. You should know what's happening in the United States as we speak. So how are they trying to destroy the Jews and destroy Israel? They can't do it in a frontal attack. They're trying to do it through a war of attrition with terror. That is exactly what the Egyptians, the Jordanians, and the Syrians attempted to do in 1964. They supported and created something called the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO. Mahmoud Abbas was a Soviet agent who was paid for years by the Soviet government, got his PhD there, denying that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. Okay? He was a member of this, the PLO. What did the PLO do? When an Israeli mother would go with her kids, shopping or to some event, they would send in their goons, their fedayeen, and they would kill her and her kids. And all you saw, most people didn't have TV in 1964. All you read in the newspapers, all you heard on the radio, it literally shut down and it paralyzed the state of Israel. When the farmer in the Galilee, he's out on his tractor, right, preparing the fields. Because in 1964, the primary industry and the primary export of the state of Israel was agriculture. It was before high-tech and before biotech. And they come in and they shoot the man off his tractor. And the whole country is in mourning. And that's all you read in the newspapers, and that's all you hear on the radio. It was wearing the people down. And they were coming primarily from two places, being sent from Syria and being sent from Jordan. Now, King Hussein in Jordan, he played everybody. He couldn't do exactly what the Syrians did because he was taking American money and American military aid. So whenever America would squeeze him, because now keep in mind, when they came from Jordan, they didn't come from across the river. What was Jordan in 1964? It was Jenin, it was Shechem, it was Calkilia, it was Ramallah. That was all Jordan. And what they did was, the Jordanians would arrest the PLO, put him in prison for a week or two, and then let him out. Syrians wouldn't do that because Syrians didn't care about American pressure. They were being supported by the Soviet Union. Israel couldn't take it. And Rabin sent in, with the support of the security cabinet, he sent in a group of soldiers into the hornet's nest, into Jenin. It wasn't supposed to go this way, but they literally literally tripped into a group of Jordanian soldiers. They were going to cut out or to take out the leadership of the PLO in Jenin. And a fight breaks out. And the Jordanian legionnaires were good soldiers. They were good fighters. They killed many of our boys. And Israel killed many of their boys. Israel won the battle. But it was an international incident. It totally humiliated King Hussein. And the whole world condemned Israel, both in Syria and in Jordan. How dare you? How dare you violate their sovereignty? Who are you to go into their towns and kill their people? Well, the world did not condemn the Jordanians and the Syrians when the PLO came and killed our people. But it's not that different today. You know how the UN works. You shouldn't be surprised by that. As Syria and Jordan were humiliated, and this is important to know because this is what led to the war, the southern border, the most powerful man in the whole Arab world was the leader of Egypt, Gamal Abdul Nasser. Guys, say that again. Gamal Abdul Nasser. Nasser was a very charismatic man. He was part of a coup, took over the country. Good-looking guy, used to take that oil, that greasy stuff, slick back his hair. He would speak, the man could give a drasha for 40 minutes. I mean, his drasha didn't quote Psukim and Ma'amar Chazal, don't get me wrong. He'd get up there for 40 minutes. And there was a lot of unemployment in Egypt. And these people were looking to get charged up. And he was a dynamic speaker. His goal was not just to be the leader of Egypt. His goal was to be the leader of the pan-Arab world, of the whole Arab world. He wanted to create, his dream is to create something called the UAR, the United Arab Republic. One thing about Nasser, he knew nothing about economy, and his people were in a terrible shape economically. Massive unemployment, massive poverty, and there was a lot of unrest. What did Nasser do? The same thing every dirty politician has done since the beginning of history. Those of you guys who studied medieval Europe. What did King Richard the Lionhearted do in England? The guy also was a dysfunctional economic leader. Every time the people were getting upset and wanted to overthrow him, he started a new crusade. He took their energies, their animus on a crusade. So what did Nasser do? Great speaker. He would end off every speech, and please understand, it wasn't just to the Egyptian people he was speaking. His addresses were literally broadcast throughout the Sunni and Shia Arab world. We're talking about a huge percentage of the population of the world would listen to him. These were always the last two sentences. We will make the Mediterranean red with the blood of the Jews. The soil of Palestine will be drenched with the blood of the Zionists. And the streets went crazy. They all were waiting for those two lines. It was always the crescendo. Allahu Akbar, jihad! And they're screaming and yelling and they wanted Jewish blood. Well, he's doing this. Big tough guy, right? Big darshan. He's a great speaker. So, those of you from America, remember the Billy Bush interview that shouldn't have been recorded with President Trump? At that time it was Donald Trump. He referred to certain locker room talk. That was his defense. I'm not an Arabic scholar, but the Arabs also have certain locker room talk. When they don't like a guy, they refer to them in certain condescending female terms and certain condescending terms associated with parts of the female anatomy. The Syrians and the Jordanians are furious. They're furious. You get up there, you've got the whole world being korei mishtachaveh because you're a great orator. Where were you when we were humiliated by the Jews? Where were you when the Jews did this to us? Yeah, big tough guy. You're the man, right? And they started calling him all kinds of names in Arabic. So they are pushing him. Gamal Abdel Nasser, when he went to bed at night, he did not have nightmares about Moshe Dayan. He did not have nightmares about Israeli paratroopers, tzadchanim. You know who Gamal Abdel Nasser had nightmares about when he went to bed at night? A man that he had a love-hate relationship with, General Amir. General Amir and him, the two of them, were part of the coup that overthrew the government and took charge. Amir was very smart. He appointed over every aspect of the Egyptian military personal cronies, guys that had a personal loyalty to him. Gamal Abdel Nasser might be the most powerful man in the Arab world. Gamal Abdel Nasser is nothing. He's a puppet without the support of General Amir. And it was a love-hate relationship. I'll give you an example. You were kids at the time. For us, it was just a few years ago. The Arab Spring. The most powerful man a few years ago in the whole Arab world, for sure in the Sunni Arab world, was Hosni Mubarak. When Hosni Mubarak, in his 80s, announced he's going to appoint his son as his Mamale Makom, his successor of Egypt, and the people went nuts and they went out, protesting in the streets, what did the Egyptian military do? The Egyptian military was controlled by a man by the name of General al-Sisi. You know al-Sisi well. He's the leader of Egypt today. You know what they did? They refused to shoot at their neighbors. They refused to point their guns at their cousins. And the Egyptian military backed off, and the most powerful man in the world was in the Arab world was overthrown. Nasser knows. He's got no choice but to work with Amir and the military, because he'll be out yesterday. Amir says to him the following: you're going to take that? Are you going to take that from the Jordanians and the Syrians? And it was true, you have a military that could annihilate Israel. The Russians spent $2 billion. Now, $2 billion today means nothing militarily. $2 billion in the 1960s was a fortune. You know what it got Egypt? It got them 500 brand new MiG jets from the Soviet Union. It got them 1,700 brand new tanks from the Soviet Union. And the Egyptian military, Amir's people, were all being supported by Soviet military attachés. Egypt could have destroyed Israel like that. Egypt didn't need the help of Syria and Jordan. And Amir says to him, you're not going to take this. You're going to show that the Egyptians are leaders, that we're the men, that we're tough. When Amir says you're going to act, Nasser had no choice. Nasser gets on the phone. I apologize, I believe the date is May 16th, 1967. I'm close by a day or two. I think it was May 16th. He gets on the phone to the head of the United Nations Emergency Forces. Remember the UNEF? The group that was going to be the solution? He says, you got 48 hours. You got 48 hours to get out of the Gaza Strip, the northern Sinai, the southern Sinai, and the Straits of Tiran. Your people aren't out of there in 48 hours. I will not guarantee your safety. You have no rights and no authority on Egyptian territory. The head of the UNEF gets on the phone and he calls the Secretary General of the United Nations. The man's name was Uthant. Uthant was from Burma. He was a Burmese. He is one of the greatest causes of this event. Uthant says to him, I don't want our soldiers, I don't want our people in harm's way. It is their sovereign territory. If he tells you to leave, take your weapons, which they didn't have time to do, it was left there for the Egyptians, and leave. To quote Abba Eben, what good is an umbrella if when it starts to rain, it never opens up or it closes down? Here, the whole purpose of the UNEF was to protect Israel. That's why we took our troops off and they packed up. Uthant did not call any of the signatories. He didn't call the United States, he didn't call England, he didn't call France. He didn't even call a United Nations Security Council meeting. And before anybody knew what happened, they were gone. Amir was fighting a proxy war against Saudi Arabia in the Sudan. And he called up the Saudis and said, look, we have bigger fish to fry. Let's put a ceasefire. Let's stop our hostilities towards each other. We can all agree we want to finally rid ourselves of the Zionists. We got the UNEF out of Gaza, out of Sinai, out of Gulf of Aqaba and the Straits of Tiran. Let us take our soldiers there. In a 10-day period, he had 84,000, I repeat, 84,000 Egyptian troops with half-tracks, with hundreds and hundreds of Soviet tanks moving into first the southern Sinai, taking over the Straits of Tiran, preventing any vessels, any cargo or oil tankers from going to the Gulf of Eilat, from going to the Eilat port. They're moving into the northern Sinai and into the Gaza Strip. And the world did nothing. The world did nothing. And in Israel, it is a crisis. It is an absolute crisis. The next 3 weeks that we will speak about are known as the Hamtana, the waiting period. Had an army of 275,000 soldiers. But guys, this is a deceptive number. Only 25% of them were full-time military. You know who the other 75% were? They were fathers and husbands, miluimnikim. These were guys who had done their tour duty 3 years ago, 6 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, who 3 weeks a year would come and do miluim, would do reserve duty. Every able-bodied man was called up, and they set up tent cities in the Negev to prepare for the war. Do you understand what that meant? From an economic point of view, the economy, not a recession, it went into a free fall. You had no able-bodied men to do the work. You had 8-year-old kids delivering the mail. It was the end of the college semester in America, in Britain, in South Africa, Canada. These Jewish kids, these Jewish young men and women were coming from all over Chutz La'aretz, milking the cows on the kibbutz and the moshav, working in the makolet, because all Israeli men were down in the Negev. You know what happened at night when, because it's hot that time of year in May and June. This year is a rare exception. The Mezek Avir is very strange this year, but it's very hot this time of year. So they would wait till the evening, and you know what the women and children and the volunteers from Chutz La'aretz were doing? They were creating sandbags, bunkers. Kibbutz Be'eri, which is the southern border, They dug 10,000 graves for the mass slaughter. Here in Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv, every park, every city park was requisitioned. It's not a park anymore. It's now designated as a mass grave site. Get rid of the swing sets, okay? Get rid of the toys. It's designated for a mass grave. Every town, every moshav, every village and city dug graves in preparation for the slaughter. You know who lived in Israel in 1967? Essentially, it was two types of population. One, the Jews who came from the Arab lands, from North Africa and the Persian Gulf. What happened to them 15, 16 years earlier? Their wives, their sisters, their mothers were violated. Many of their family were killed. They escaped with literally the shirts on their back. These were Jews living in these Arab lands for 600, 700, 800 years. And overnight they had to flee. They were beaten, lost everything. And they heard Gamal Abdel Nasser because they spoke Arabic. It was their first language. They were listening, and they were listening to the crowds and their reaction. Who else lived in this country in 1967? Who were the Ashkenazim? If you came from Lita, which means Lithuania, Latvia, or Belarus, 4 out of a town of 100, that's right, 4.5% survived. You might have been the only first cousin of 40 first cousins. You might have been the only family member. You're reliving what happened in 1941, 42. If you came from Poland, 9% survived. Again, you're the only member of the family who survived. You survived on 8 miracles, and now you're reliving what happened 20 years ago. If you're from Hungary, 1 out of 2 survived. Only because the Holocaust didn't start in Hungary till the spring of 44. So half your population was annihilated. The country was in a state of trauma. They were calling this Auschwitz II. This is the second Shoah that's about to happen in 25 years. The country was in trauma. Never before and never since did diaspora Jewry raise the kind of money that it raised. Federations in South Africa, US, Canada, Britain, Western Europe, Australia, they never raised that kind of money, never before, never after. The one nechama the Jews of Israel had is that the B'nai Chutz La'aretz were funding, were pouring money in. But here's the problem. Israel can't fight this war. You're against crazy odds. The Syrians and Jordanians, they are all part of Egypt. They've been created the UAR. They've handed over their military. Famous, you can look at it on YouTube. King Hussein comes with his gun. General Amir meets him at the Cairo airport, and he says, "My forces are your forces." And the world does nothing. Abba, even at this time, is the foreign minister of the state of Israel. He goes to France, and France is the primary military supporter of the state of Israel. Prime Minister Charles de Gaulle speaks to him the way you would give rebuke to a little child. Talks to him with a finger like this. "I know you people." Be careful when they start with "you people." "You better not shoot the first bullet. You better not start or preempt anything. Don't you dare start a war. And if you disobey my orders, not only will you never see a French jet, a French mortar shell, a French tank, we won't sell you one stinking bullet. Do you understand me?" Abba even says to him, "We didn't start this. You were a signatory in 1956. You supported us. We don't have the rights to have the same right of every nation on the globe? Access to international waters? We didn't start this thing." How can you say that? De Gaulle responded to him. That was 1956. This is 1967. What did that mean? What did he mean by that? In 1956, the Arabs didn't have that kind of Soviet weaponry. In 1956, the Arabs didn't have that kind of control and influence in the world. They didn't have the second largest or first largest, depending on your opinion, country of the world backing them. Oil and petroleum wasn't as crucial to the French economy in what it would do if the French didn't play games with the Arabs. De Gaulle had totally turned his back on the Jews. Abba Eban goes to London, the second signatory. Prime Minister Wilson was very nice to him, but all he gave him was sweet words. England would not guarantee them anything. He's got one last shot. The leader of the Western world. President of the United States is Lyndon Baines Johnson. Johnson was a friend of the Jews. He was a friend of Israel. And he will go down in history as a great friend of Israel. Johnson, before he was the leader, he was the senator from Texas. He was he was the Senate Majority Leader in the Senate before becoming Vice President. After the assassination of JFK, became President. So long before that, when he was a congressman from Texas, from Johnson City, Texas, he was very helpful to European Jews who immigrated through the Galveston port. Any of you from Houston? South of Houston, there's a Galveston port. He was always a friend of the Jews. JFK was not a friend of Israel. He was not an anti-Semite like his father, but was not a friend of Israel. One of the people I interviewed for this talk is the famous historian Michael Owen. And he said, we can't prove this, but we're confident of it. The reason that David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, resigned, the first time he met an American president at a meeting was with JFK at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Manhattan, not in the White House. And JFK's big thing was nuclear proliferation, to basically demilitarize and denuke the world. And Israel had Dimona. It was a known secret to the world that with the help of the French, Israel created, under David Ben-Gurion, under the leadership of Shimon Peres, a nuclear apparatus to defend itself in a scenario of existential threat. And Kennedy wanted them to take it down. And every time they would send inspectors here, they would show them part of the nuclear apparatus that was basic nuclear energy. Right? Nuclear energy is something which is fair and game. Nuclear weaponry, which is what Iran was trying to do, which is a very different form of enriching uranium than basic nuclear energy. That Israel never showed them. And Kennedy said to him, you're either with us or you're against us. Don't play those games. We know you're playing games with the inspectors. David Ben-Gurion had enough. He could not take that. And he resigned. Let someone else do that. Because Kennedy was threatening an American embargo if they didn't get access and they didn't be part of the nuclear treaty. When Kennedy was assassinated, Lyndon Baines Johnson said to the Jewish community, and he reached out to Israel, and it was true what he said. He said the following: the state of Israel and the people of Israel have lost a very good friend with the death of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. But the state of Israel and the people of Israel have gained an even better friend in Lyndon Baines Johnson. Abba Eban comes to Johnson. Now please understand historically, what is May 1967? It's a year before what? The United States presidential elections. LBJ is not going to run for re-election because he can't beat any Republican. What has destroyed LBJ? Not because he was a bad president, he was a good president. What destroyed LBJ? Vietnam. America was upset. America was furious. Americans had lost already tens of thousands of lives in Vietnam, and there was no end in store. And they couldn't get out of this mess. Not only could he not beat a Republican in '68, he probably would not have won in his own primary, the primary of the Democratic Party. In his team, Secretary of State Dean Rusk was a friend of Israel. Abba Eban comes to them, and Johnson says to him, I'm using the Texas accent, you boys, You can all be shooting the first shot, you shoot the first bullet, you're gonna have to go it alone. You boys, you take that first bullet, you take that first hit, then you got the moral ground, the moral high ground on your side. You got the moral high ground on your side, then we can justify. Then we can justify coming in and arming you and supporting you. Another way of saying it in Yiddish, like a Teutenbankers, he got nothing. He got nothing! Not from the French, not from the British, not from the Americans. Because LBJ, even though he wanted to help, he didn't have the support from either party in the Senate or the Congress. Abba Eben was a very gregarious guy. They didn't like Abba Eben. He was a guy that was like a lone wolf. He liked to do things on his own. He loved the camera. He loved the limelight. He thought highly of himself. They always said about Abba Eben, he always had the right speech, never the right solution. They used to refer to him as the gelernte Narr. In English, you'd say the idiot with a PhD. He was a very bright man, but his political moves were not great. His speeches were fantastic, and he was a great orator for Israel. He came out of there, this very gregarious personality, ghost white. You can see it on YouTube. The cameras are in his face. It was probably the only time Abba Eben was ever at a loss for words. But one thing Abba Eben did that was very well in that meeting, and we found out about it about 15 years later. They interviewed the Secretary of Defense of the United States, Robert McNamara. McNamara said to him, because Johnson said, look, what we'll do is we'll set up an international convoy. We'll have a convoy of ships and cargo ships from all different countries. We'll go through the Straits of Tiran, and included in that will be a Persian vessel holding petroleum. Johnson couldn't get anybody. He couldn't get his own country to help. He couldn't get any other countries to help. The great America let Israel down. And in that meeting, McNamara said to Abba Eben, he says, why are you all boys, you're all nervous, getting all upset? You're not going to lose your country. Come on. We got military intelligence on you boys and on the Arabs. We figured like this. The Arabs, particularly the Egyptians, they start with you. You got to be able to defend yourselves. Y'all take them down. It might take you 2 weeks. You suffer a lot of losses. But if you take a hit like that, as President done told you, we're going to support you boys. I apologize. That if the Arabs hit first, the American military intelligence said it would take Israel a month to defend themselves. About 4 weeks. You boys shoot the first shot, you start this thing, we figure you'd take out the Egyptians in 2 weeks. So why are you all squawking? Abba Eben, it took a lot of guts for him to do this. He said, with all due respect, you ever have a discussion or a fight with somebody? When someone says with all due respect to you, that's a nice way of saying, this. He says, with all due respect, Secretary of Defense McNamara, wasn't it American military intelligence that said in Vietnam, it'll be real easy going, we'll get in and get out, we'll take care of this? You've lost tens of thousands of American lives. You got hundreds of thousands of Americans fighting there right now. Our tiny little country, we can't run the risk that American intelligence might make another mistake on their assessment of Egypt and Israel. To his credit. When he came home with nothing, it was a mess. The country is in depression. I'll tell you how bad it got. For the first time in the history of Israel, they brought Menachem Begin, who was the opposition leader. They brought Menachem Begin and they made him minister without portfolio. They created an emergency cabinet. You understand who Begin was? To us, he's a hero. He was a great Jew. To them, David Ben-Gurion never referred to him by his name, Mar Begin, Mr. Begin. Always referred to him as Oto Ha'ish. Now, those of you guys who have you seen the Chisronos Hashas, in all of Talmud Bavli, to the best of my knowledge, I think there's only one person who has the approbation of Oto Ha'ish, and that's the carpenter of Nazareth. That's what David Ben-Gurion referred to Begin. It was so bad they brought bacon into the cabinet. There was one group in Israel, guys, that was not plotting. I'll tell you how bad it was. The Rav HaRashi, the chief rabbi of the state of Israel, Rav Unterman. Rav Unterman Zatzal, out of his own money, he took advertisements in Ma'ariv, Yediot Acharonot. Al tityaesh. Don't give up. Do not be depressed. And he quoted the verse that you say every morning. Kapitel Chaf, the 20th Psalm. Eilev arecha ve'elev asusim v'nachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu naskir, right? They rely on their chariots and their horses. They're relying on the Soviet MiGs and tanks. We rely on the Almighty. He tried. Didn't work. The people were still depressed, but he tried. You know the one group that was not depressed? One group. The general staff of the IDF. Why? Anyone here, by show of hands, has a parent that's in a business? Anyone here have a show of hands, have a parent that runs their own practice? Okay. Any business person, and by the way, the Rebbeim, the Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Chanan, and the Rebbeim do this all the time at Netiv. You do strategic planning. What would happen if there was a problem? You know, let's say TABC wasn't working out, or DRS wasn't working out, or MTA, let's say one of the major feeder schools. Or what would happen if the places that we're sending our boys after Yeshiva, whether it's YU or Landers or this one or that one, what happens if there's a problem? How are we going to be able to develop the boys, to give them a great experience at the Yeshiva? How are we going to be able to have a system where they continue to grow? Any business is doing strategic planning. And you look at your suppliers. You look at, if cost of this goes up. What happens if this market changes? What happens if technology replaces this? Xerox today is almost out of business because of the cameras on the iPhone and the Samsung. Other companies went into different technology, were able to keep it moving. The general staff did the following. It's called strategic planning. And they did it in 1964. Listen to this exercise the general staff did. What would happen in the worst case scenario? Could Israel survive? Could Medinat Yisrael survive a worst case scenario? What's a worst case scenario? The Syrians attack us from the north, the Jordanians attack us from the east, and the Egyptians attack us from the south. It's a three-pronged war. Could Israel survive? Simple answer was, no way. What they worked out a plan was how it could survive. It was known as Mivtza Saddam, Operation Anvil, Operation the Hammer. Bring the hammer down. What was the whole idea of Mivtza Saddam? How could Israel survive a worst case scenario? It would require one thing, and this is going to be the beginning of the Nes, the multiple Nisim. It would require the IAF doing a preemptive strike, flying below radar, flying on radio silence, taking out all the Egyptian air bases, landing strips, so that the most powerful weapon in the Mideast, the Soviet MiG jet, when it's on the ground, it's impotent. And if we can take out the Egyptian in a preemptive strike, that's the key line, guys. Remember that phrase, a preemptive strike, Israel could survive. What did the generals say to Levi Eshkol into the cabinet? Take the handcuffs off! Take the freaking handcuffs off! Give us a green light! Every day you sit here, twiddling your thumbs. You know what happens? General Amir's bringing more thousands of soldiers, and they're getting closer to our border. We have a plan. Mivtza Saddam, take the handcuffs off. Guys, what did the Prime Minister Levi Eshkol respond to? I mean, Shouldn't they have done the preemptive strike weeks earlier? Understand one thing. Levi Eshkol grew up in the Ukraine. Until he was 13, he was learning in Cheder. His first language was Yiddish. He thought in Yiddish. He spoke to his wife in Yiddish. Responded to them. Grosse Chachamim. Oh, big tough Jews now, right? You're the new Jew. You're the Israeli Jew. Big tough guys, you generals. Ariel Sharon was born here. This one was born here. Let me ask you something, huh? What happens after you know better than I do what kind of reserves we have, what kind of stock we have of bombs for our French Mystiers and Mirages? You heard from Abi Ibn what de Gaulle said. You know what kind of mortar shells, you know what kind of tank shells, and you know what kind of bullets we have for our guns. So we're going to start this thing, right? And after the first round, when we got no reserves, oh, big tough generals. You going to shoot them with a squirt gun? You going to use a BB gun? What are you going to do then, huh? We're going to sit here, and if we have to take it, we need to be reserved, rearmed. The only way that happens is if we take the hit. And you know what the general said to him? Those tens of thousands of graves you dug in Kibbutz Be'eri and in every city and town in Israel? Why don't you dig a few 100,000 more? Because you can make a lot more than that. Every day this thing goes on, we're in a worse place. It was a mess during the Hamtanah. The cabinet said, look, the people are dying. You know, saying Yiddish, the plots, they're dying of depression. They're reliving the trauma of the Holocaust. They're reliving the trauma of their expulsion from the Arab lands. Prime Minister, you got to address, we have to have an address of the nation. So they planned for him to have a live broadcast to address the nation. To be mechazik, to strengthen the people. What happened? It's not 2018. If you guys are writing a speech, and the speech writers want to change it around, you delete this word, you add this word, you get it printed out. It looks nice. You change the font, you can read it easier. This was 1967. And right up to the speech, they're crossing out this word. You know those little triangles, little smidges they put in, they're putting in this? They're doctoring up the draft. And the thing, you can't read it. Levi Eshkol hasn't slept in 10 nights. He's sick, he's got a cold, he's overtired, he's wheezing. He gets up to a draft, he can't even read the paper. And it was a debacle. The people said, you know what? Last man out, shut the lights off. We're dead. This Shlomi, the gross Shlomi, this is our leader. We're through. It's over. It had the opposite effect. They did something that none of them wanted to do. The generals didn't need him, and the cabinet didn't want, but they had no choice. They brought the devil back. They invited the devil in. Who am I referring to? The man with the patch, Moshe Dayan. He was not part of the Labor Party anymore. He was part of the Rafi Party. He was out of government. Dayan was the smartest guy. You talk about a chess player, guys, and you talk about a poker face. He was the smartest guy in the room. He was a tough guy. Came to women, he made Harvey Weinstein look like a Boy Scout. You'd give Harvey Weinstein after Yonah. Dayan was not a nice guy. Him and his buddies, they raided all the antiquities. He had his buddy, he had a shop in London. They were stolen, all this antiquities that should have been that should have belonged to Israel. Should have been the national treasure. Those guys got rich selling this stuff. He was a tough guy. But you know what he had? The nation respected him. They had no respect, even though they were wrong for this. The people didn't have respect for Eshkol or the cabinet. They respected Dayan. Nobody wanted him, but they knew they had to. They brought him in and made him Minister of Defense. And by the way, he agreed with Levi Eshkol. He was not in favor of a strike. But nothing was happening. All the American promises about a convoy and this and that, Israel's getting no help. And Amir is getting stronger and putting more troops into the Sinai. One last chance, guys. They didn't trust Levi Eshkol. I'm sorry, Abi, but they didn't trust him. They sent the head of Mossad, who had a very good relationship with the CIA. They sent him to Washington to meet with the cabinet, with President Johnson and Secretary of State Dean Rusk. Johnson, and this is Motzei Shabbos, June 3rd. I'm sorry, I said this wrong. It's Shabbos, June 3rd. It was an emergency meeting. He said the same thing, same words. You boys, you know, shoot the first shot. You're all going to be going it alone. I told you. We can't help you unless you have the moral high ground. But he didn't say it the way he said it 2 weeks earlier. He knew America had let down Israel. He knew America had left them all alone by themselves. He said the same words, but the way Michael Oren described it, instead of it being a red light, it was a yellow light. When the head of the Mossad left, came back to Israel, got word back to Israel, Eshkol realized, we're not going to get any help. They called an emergency cabinet meeting, and here's where the miracle starts. Tomorrow, June 5th, Monday morning, from Ramat David in the Galilee, 7:10 they'll take off. From the air base in the Negev, 7:15 they'll take off. The beginning of Mivtza Sadan. They're going to call this part of it Mivtza Moked. What's the plan? We're only leaving 12 planes. The state of Israel will be absolutely naked. It will be unprotected. We're only leaving 12 planes. Everyone else is going off. They're flying 20, 25 meters off the ground, under radar, on radio silence. You get hit, you don't call anybody, nothing. Most of them are going across the Mediterranean. They're going out overseas. They'll come and they're going to hit every Egyptian airbase. Even way down to the south near Libya and the Sudan, with the exception of one landing strip, Sharm el-Sheikh. We're going to leave that intact so we can land our boys, the Jewish boys there, to open up the straits. Planes through Jordan. Surprise. Because what was the first nace of this nace? Military intelligence. The first nace was they had military intelligence. Every morning, Kiseder, the Egyptian Air Force, on all the bases, they would take off 6:40, 6:45, and they would do their sorties. They would come back by about 7:20, 7:18, 7:20 at the latest. The from ones, they would pray to Allah and say the things about Muhammad, get on the carpet. The not so from ones would go to breakfast. Then the from ones would join them at breakfast if there was anything left in the mess hall. We're going to strike at 7:30. They're going to be off wrestling. The daveners and the non-daveners are all going to be... That's the plan. They took off. Second miracle. The Egyptians knew, and the Jordanians in particular knew, that Israel had good military intelligence, and they were afraid the Israelis were listening in on their correspondence, on how, the whole thing when they were going to strike Israel, how they would do it. So what did they do? Every Shabbos, every Saturday, they changed the codes. So that if Israel figured out their code system, they would always have a new code. Shabbos, June 3rd, 2 days before the strike, supposed to change the codes. The Jordanians did change the codes. Egyptians, because Amir, who never had planned this war out, he was just over the last 2 weeks just slamming thousands of soldiers and troops and his buddies who had never had training for a war, having them take different positions. A lot of sloppiness, a lot of mistakes. The guys supposed to be overseeing the codes didn't change the code from last week. The Jordanians saw the Israeli aircraft over Jordanian territory going south to Egypt. They called the Egyptians. They code the Egyptians with this week's codes. The Egyptians are still using what? Last week's codes. Didn't make any sense what they were sending. Totally ignored it. It was a nisim. It exceeded their wildest optimistic hope by 9 No, I'm sorry, the first strikes were like 7:35, 7:40, 7:45. They took out, they didn't have enough bombs to take out the MiGs. They took out the landing strips. They blew up the bases, the towers. They even blew up some of they had at the time the Soviet anti-aircraft. They blew up some of those bases, like Israel did 2-3 nights ago in Syria. One of the guys, Nebuch, one of the Israeli aircraft, he was killed. You know why? On his way back, he got too close to Dimona. And remember, they're on radio silence. They can't communicate. He was shot down. We shot down our own boy because we thought it was an Egyptian plane coming for Dimona. They came back. During the 3 weeks of the Hamtanah, they did something fantastic. The time to refuel and rearm a French Mystère or a French Mirage jet is about 28 minutes. They had teams for every jet, and they were practicing this for 3 weeks. They had it down to 7.5 to 8 minutes to refuel these things and rearm them. The pilot would get up, take his mask off, get some real oxygen. These guys were pumping in the fuel. They had like 2 ways of pumping in the fuel. They rearmed him. Boom! 7.5, 8 minutes later, off the base. He's back. The second time, they took like target practice. There were dead ducks, these MiGs sitting on the runways that had been blown up. Boom, 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 boom! They took out 87% of all Egyptian aircraft. Guys, by 9:30 Monday morning, it was over in terms of a war with Egypt. Not that the war had even begun, but they had neutralized. They had denuded the whole Egyptian Air Force. The General Amir himself, he was up in a plane at that time. He couldn't land anywhere. He had to land, his plane had to be landed at Cairo International Airport, the civilian airport, because there was no military airport left. Now the land war starts. General Gavish is 92 years old. I tried to interview him, I couldn't get to him. He oversees the whole Southern Command. Ariel Sharon, all these guys. These guys are going into Gaza. These ones Northern Sinai. These Southern Sinai. But the Israeli tanks and the Israeli soldiers have an air force to back them up. The Egyptians, even though they outnumber us, they got nothing backing them up. Those Egyptian tanks, those Russian tanks, they might do very well against the Israeli tanks. But from the air, the Israeli Air Force, boom, 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 it's again target practice. This is like in a video game. And they're taking out tank after tank. Israel was listening to the communication between Gamal Abdel Nasser and King Hussein in Jordan. Nasser's on the phone with Hussein, telling him the following, lying to him, telling him the following thing. We have taken out the Israeli Air Force. Our troops are in the Negev. By 3 o'clock this afternoon, we'll be in Beersheba. Tomorrow, you better join us, because Al-Quds will be liberated. What's Al-Quds, guys? Anyone? Yerushalayim. That's the Arabic word for Yerushalayim. The war for Al-Quds will be tomorrow, and you better be there with your troops. The Israelis hear this. They tell Levi Eshkol through the United States and through General Bull. You guys, you know where Haas Promenade is? Armon HaNetziv? Armon HaNetziv is the high point of Jerusalem. In the southern side of Yerushalayim, it's the high point. Many people go to Terkriya, they go to Armon HaNetziv. General Bull is the United Nations High Commissioner there. Israel calls him up. He was no friend of Israel, but they had him send this message to Jordan, King Hussein, and they called up the United States and had them send the message to King Hussein. Please do not listen to Nasser. He's lying to you. We have no war with you. We have no qualms with you, no fight with you. Please, please do not get involved in this. He's lying to you, he's losing. Well, the Egyptian military attachés that are running things in Jordan, nothing's happening. They call up Nasser. Nasser gets on the phone, he starts yelling at Hussein. If you're not in Al-Quds, if you're not joining us after I liberate Al-Quds, I'm coming to Amman and I'll capture you. He started screaming at him. Lady Eshkol a second time, because they got this, they hear this. Please, we have no fight with you. You're King Hussein, guys. Guess who are you going to believe? The stinking Jew or your fellow Muslim? Who's lying to you? Who's the liar? Is it the stinking Jew or your fellow Muslim? King Hussein made the worst decision of his life. He didn't believe the Jew. He believed Gamal Abdul Nasser. 10:15 a.m. Monday morning, the high point to the south, Armon and Netziv, the Jordanian legionnaires started attacking. 10:30, the high point to the north, Har Hatzofim, Mount Scopus. Because if you're Jordan, how are you going to conquer Jerusalem? You know how you're going to conquer it? You're going to take the high point from the south and come in and smash them. You're going to take the high point from the north and come in and smash the Jews. That's how you're going to conquer the west. It's not so simple to go through the middle because there's barbed wire and everything else. What does he do? The war starts. Now, think about the miracle here. Who's in Yerushalayim? Who's defending it? Fathers and husbands, reservists, because everybody else is for the war in the Negev, the big wars against Egypt. You had in the middle of the city the 55th Brigade. They were reservist paratroopers. Tzadchanim were guys in their late 20s, under Montagur. Into the south and the north, you had the Harel Brigade and the Jerusalem Brigade. Same thing. You didn't have many soldiers here. After the Jordanians attacked Armon and Netziv, they were able to fend off. Israel conquered Armon and Netziv, defeated the Jordans on it. Israel had been hiding weapons and hiding some soldiers in Har Hatzofim in the event that there would be a war there. They defeated the Jordans in Har Hatzofim. We have the two high points. Once you have the two high points, not only can the Jordanians not come and slaughter you, now you can come into the east. Remember, this is all Jordan. You guys were sitting in Jordan in 1967. And they start moving in. But here's the difference. They had 3 weeks of preparation for a war against Egypt. They had maps, they had strategies, they had satellite, they didn't have satellite photos, but they had aerial photos. They didn't know anything about this area. They didn't know streets, they didn't have maps. You know what these guys did? The first guy threw himself on the barbed wire, and then the other guys climbed over him. When they were coming around a corner, the first guy knew he was a dead meat. He would go around the corner, take the hit from the Jordanian sniper, many times was killed, knowing he was going to be killed, but that way the second, third, and fourth guy would see where the bullet's coming from, where the snipers are, and they could take out the snipers and conquer that street or that path. Of the 788 Jews who were killed, soldiers who were killed in this war, 182 fell here. This was the worst carnage, was the battle for Yerushalayim. 182 were killed here. And the bloodiest of them all was the battle known as Kivat HaTachmoshet, Ammunition Hill. It started 7:30 Monday night. Because the Israelis, the Tzanchanim, the Rockefeller went from 7:30 p.m. till 2:30 a.m. Tuesday morning. And you know what? 37 boys died. I'll ask you at some time to go to Givat HaTachmoshet. It tells the story of every one of the 182 who was killed in the battle for Yerushalayim. And you will see with your own eyes, most of them were fathers and husbands. Terrible collateral damage. Terrible collateral damage. But once they conquered that, slowly but surely, every neighborhood in East Yerushalayim, the only thing that was not conquered on Tuesday afternoon was the Ir Atikah. Moshe Dayan said, I am not starting World War III. Oh yeah, we're going to go in there. We got 2 Arab nations fighting us now. We'll have 20 Arab nations against us in a war. I'm not doing that. We're going to have a gun battle in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? The Vatican and every Christian nation on earth will hold us responsible. I'm not doing it. No way. The UN's going to shut this thing down. They're going to call a ceasefire any moment. Let me just get my guys to Sharm el-Sheikh. That was our goal, was to open up the Straits of Tehran. And 2 men, guys. And we have to thank these 2 men for the rest of Jewish history. Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin, not saying he was totally shomer mitzvahs, but he came from a frum perspective. Yigal alone was not frum, was not religious. He came from a Jewish historical perspective. Moshe Dayan, you can't hold that against him. A Zionist he was, a big Zionist. His knowledge of Jewish history was nothing. He didn't have religious sensitivities. He didn't have Jewish historical sensitivities. He wasn't educated that way. Begin and Yigal alone, they knew better. And they came in, this was like 3 or 4 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, and they shook, I mean figuratively. They said to Eshkol, you know better. You are educated. You know what Yerushalayim is. So Begin spoke in a language, the Ribono Shel Olam, the Almighty is giving us on a magash shel kesef, on a silver platter. He's giving us. We've been refugees for 2 millennia. Yigal alone came from the perspective of Jewish history. You know better. You know what Jerusalem is to us. History will never forgive you. The Jewish people will never forgive you. The Almighty will never forgive. They shook him. Eshkol called an emergency meeting at the cabinet. They couldn't get them all there until Wednesday morning. It was 7 a.m. They needed to act before the UN shut this thing down. 7 a.m. Wednesday morning, June 7th, okay? 7 a.m., Wednesday morning, June 7th. Where did they meet? In the Klita, in the bomb bunker, in the Klita of the Knesset, because the Jordanians were still lobbing mortars trying to blow up the Knesset. So they met in the bunker there. Dayan sees he's going to lose this vote. Dayan flips. He doesn't want to be on the losing side of history, so he flips his opinion. They give the approval Wednesday morning. Guys, and all you know this from the Haftarahs from Yirmiyahu, 35 out of 36 times that Yerushalayim was conquered in the history of human history, 36 times, 35 times it was conquered from the north. The most famous to us is the story of the Babylonians, of Bavel, from Yirmiyahu and Sefer Malachim. The 37th time, Matagur conquered it from the east. Shar Arayot, not far from here, guys. Uzinarchus was there. They blew up the gates, and they go through the Lion's Gate, Shar Arayot. And for the most part, there are a few Jordanian snipers, but for the most part, the Arabs are waving the white flags. What happened? The boys are asking them, Efa Har HaBayit? Where's the Temple Mount? Where's Har HaBayit? The Arabs didn't know that term. So a few of the soldiers said, Harim al-Sharif. Where's Harim al-Sharif? So the Arabs take him up there. On Tuesday, when they were fighting in Yerushalayim, an elderly woman came to them. And she gives to these guys from the 55th Paratrooper Brigade, it looks like a shmata. And they said, well, what is this? She says, this is the Jewish flag. This was the flag of the state of Israel. Like, why is it? They think to themselves, why didn't you wash this thing clean? She tells her story. Our family were the last ones out of the old city. The Jordanians, they took some of my relatives as POWs. All we could leave with was the clothes on our back. We were the last ones to leave our holy city. And I took with me the one thing I could take, this flag. She says, boys, I pray 3 times a day. I pray that the Ribono Shel Olam will bring us back to our holy city. Will bring us back that we can go to the Kosel Ma'aravi. Will enable us as Jews to live in Yerushalayim. Please, boys, and she's crying. Hashem should be with you. You should have Hatzlacha. You should have success. And take this flag with you. You've all seen the picture. They get up on that Temple Mount and they take this woman's flag and and they they attach it to like the barbed wire, over the Temple Mount. The most famous 3 words in all of modern Jewish history is when Mata Gur gets on the mic. Moshe Dayan's up there at Mount Scopus, and he words back to him, Har Habayit Biyadenu. Har Habayit Biyadenu. The Temple Mount, for the first time in 2,000 years, is in Jewish hands. Now, Yoel ben Nun, he was a kid who grew up learning Mishnayos. He learned Masechta Midos and Masechta Tamid. He's the first Jew who's been up in 1900 years. The rest of them, they don't know from this. What do they know? This one grew up in a communist kibbutz. This one grew up in a socialist kibbutz. I mean, you guys have pictures of LeBron James on your wall. They had pictures of Joseph Stalin on their wall. They didn't know from Har Habayit. But one thing they all knew, their Babis and the Zaydis had told them about the Kosel HaMa'aravi. So Dayan with the binoculars is on Har Tzofim. He sees an Israeli flag. He sees the blue and white Magen David over the Temple Mount. He goes nuts. He said, are you kidding me? Are you nuts? You want to start World War III? You don't take that flag down, I'll come up, court-martial, I'll rip your freaking head off your shoulders and I'll eat it for lunch. You get that flag down. So everybody sees the famous picture. They had to take the flag down. The boys start asking on the walk, where's the kotel? Where's the kotel? So the Arabs take them down to Rabbi Gate from Har Habayit. You know what they see? A dump. The Arabs disrespected our holy kosel. It was a garbage dump. There were shanties there and garbage all over the place. These guys start cleaning out the garbage. Who joined them? The chief rabbi of Tzahal, Rabbi Golan, Rabbi Shlomo Golan. This yeshiva is from the Golan family. He was fighting with the guys in the Gaza. He hears a Jordan attack, that there's a second front, that there's a battle for Yerushalayim. He told his driver, turn this Jeep around. They started going. They got hit. His driver tragically died from his wounds. Rabbi Golan drove the Jeep back to Yerushalayim. He goes to his father-in-law's home, the Nazir, Rabbi David Cohn. He goes to the Nazir. He was a short man. He was a lion. Rabbi Golan was a lion of a man, but very short. He gets up and he pulls down the shofar. The shofar that you keep in this yeshiva. He takes his father-in-law with him. They join the Tzanchanim, the 55th Brigade of Paratroopers. You've all seen the famous picture of the shofar that's here in Netiv Aryeh with Rabbi Golan trying to blow it. It looks like he's blowing it in the picture. The real story? This lion of a man who was a fantastic Baal Tokea, he became so choked up, so overcome with emotion, couldn't get a sound out. He gave the shofar to one of the boys. The boy blew the shofar. He regained his composure. He took these guys. These are boys from communist homes, from socialist homes, and he taught them how to say the Kaddish. At the coast, you know who they were saying Kaddish for? All their friends who had been killed on Monday night and Tuesday in the conquest for the liberation of Yerushalayim. And they're crying these like babies. And they say Tehillim, and you all know the story. The fourth miracle in this story, when King Hussein hears that the Jews had conquered the Mekomos HaKadoshim, so in his mind he was referring to Al-Aqsa and to the Shrine of Omar, that the Jews have conquered Jerusalem, he says, I'm dead. They're going to revolt and kill me. He calls back the Jordanian legionnaires, because the Jordanian legionnaires have a personal oath of loyalty to him. Get back! Get now! Cross the river, get back to Amman, you got to save the kingdom. When all of the legionnaires leave their posts and they start with their weapons, they start going back, driving back across the river. The regular Jordanian army sees this, and they start following the Jordanian legionnaires. Wednesday morning, the Kosel was liberated. Wednesday morning, Har Habayit was liberated. Guys, by Wednesday afternoon, we had Beit Lechem in just south of here. Wednesday afternoon, 3 o'clock, we had Hebron. Ma'arat Machpelah was ours. The whole Yehuda was ours. You know why? Because the miracle here was the Jordanians abandoned everything. That would have taken weeks against them. Months. And it was in 4 hours. Because there was no one defending it. To the north, almost the same thing. There were still some Jordanian soldiers, but 80% of them had left. By Thursday morning, Israel was no longer 9 miles wide. Guys, by Thursday morning, it was actually a viable, tenable state that could be defended from the river to the sea. All of the places of Jewish history, Shechem, Hebron, Beit Lechem, Yerushalayim, we didn't have any of that. None of that existed until 1967. And now on Wednesday, the June 7th, it's ours. Well, all of this is going on. The Syrians have not entered Israeli territory, but the Syrians are bombing us. Mortar shell after mortar shell. They've evacuated all the women and children. And the leader of the Israeli forces on the northern border, you've heard the name, General David Elazar. General David Elazar, you'll know from the Yom Kippur War. He was the general leading the forces on the north. And he's begging, let us fight. Let us. For 19 years, all the Jews living in the northern Galilee, they've been target practice. These Syrians have tortured them. These kids grew up with traumatic stress disorder because of having to run to bomb shelters all the time. For once and for all, let us clean up the Golan Heights. Let us clean up those bunkers and make it safe for the Jews. Safe for the Jews in Galilee. They keep saying no. Moshe Dayan says, are you kidding me? I'm fighting 2 wars. You want me to fight a 3rd war against the Syrians? No. If they come in and they try to take land and do a land grab in the Galilee, I have no choice. I have to go to war. But if not, you've evacuated the children and the women. Let the men live in bomb shelters. Just take your hits. Suck it up and take the hits, guys. I can't afford a 3rd war. And the UN's going to shut it down before we accomplish anything? No. Dado Elazar, on Wednesday night, he drives all the way to the... You ever hear the phrase the bore? The bore means the pit. You know what the bore is, guys? That is the underground mission command center in Tel Aviv. That was where the Ministry of Defense was. That's where they had all their strategy with the generals, and that's where they made their decisions. He comes and he begs Eshkol to override Moshe Dayan. Dayan said, not happening. You know what the size of Israel is today? I don't have enough soldiers to man the southern Sinai, the northern Sinai, to man the west bank of the Jordan River, what we call Yehuda and Shomron, Judea, Samaria. I can't. I don't have it. No. Next miracle. Thursday. We're now on the 4th day of the war. It's over. They're going to shut it down. In the United Nations, and this is amazing, this story, you talk about the hand of the Ribono Shalom. There was a famous Jew in America, a great legal mind. Both Republicans and Democrats would have nominated him, would have approved his nomination. His name was Arthur Goldberg. He wanted to be a Supreme Court justice. He wanted it. He would have had it. He was going to be nominated. He would have been a Supreme Court justice. The Democrats said to him, listen, we know you want this. We know you deserve it. You got to take one for the team. You can do more for us. We need you as the United States ambassador to the United Nations. He was so hurt. He was so distraught, but he was a loyal guy. He was a loyal American. He was a big Zionist. He accepted it. And he became the United States ambassador to the UN. Who knew that God had a plan for him? His job, because the Soviets were trying to shut this thing down. The Soviets were humiliated. The Russians were humiliated because they were bragging for weeks how the Soviet mighty weaponry and the Soviet force is going to do to the Israelis what it did to the Americans in Vietnam, and they were bragging up. And here the word is getting out. Every hour it's getting out how bad this slaughter is, and it's humiliating the Russians. So he's been trying to delay, to give Israel more and more time to be able to defend itself and conquer and to be safe. What happened? He couldn't push it off anymore. Thursday, 1 p.m. in New York at the United Nations, which is what this time? It's 8 p.m. here in Israel. That's going to be the meeting. There's going to be a meeting in the General Assembly, and there's going to be a ceasefire called. Here's the next miracle. The Egyptian ambassador, who's supposed to be part of this and follow the script, gets up and addresses the United Nations. Ceasefire? Ceasefire? You know what ceasefire means? It means you stop where you are and I stop where I am. There ain't no ceasefire with these stinking Jews. Those thieving Zionists are going to give us back every inch they've stole over the last 4 days. They are going to retract back to the Negev. There's no ceasefire until the stinking Jews give up everything they've taken from us. Who gets up next? The Syrian ambassador to the United Nations. Ceasefire? You know what ceasefire meant? And he gives all the guns to Russia too. They said, the Soviet ambassador to the United Nations, the man's head was in his hands. You never heard that phrase, pulling out his hair? He was like pulling out his hair. This nightmare, this disaster, these idiots, these morons who have been humiliated, now they want the war to go on more so they can be humiliated more. They said he was just like, he's probably going to go back to Russia. They're going to kill him because he was supposed to get a ceasefire and he didn't do his job. You know, they don't take too well to that. You know, the Soviet Politburo. So the ambassador to Israel, he runs out of there. He says, "Guys, it's supposed to be over. They didn't shut us down." Moshe Dayan gets, because he's there. They get word. They're in the Bor in Tel Aviv. He calls up the Dado Elazar, who's in the northern Galilee. Hey, Dado. You've been crying to me for 3 days. Let me go. Let me fight. Gonna get peace for the people of the Galilee. He says, Dado, let me sing you a little song. He says, guess what happened 20 minutes ago at the United Nations in New York? There ain't no ceasefire. Dado, tomorrow morning at the crack of dawn, you can go for it. I can't give you much. I got my troops are spread all over the Sinai, all over the west bank of the Jordan River. I'll give you a little bit. You're on your own, but you're a big tough guy. You guys said you want to do it. You got the green light. General David Elazar Dado, he says back to him, he says, Moshe, he says, you just played the sweetest music I've ever heard in my life. We're not waiting for the crack of dawn tomorrow. We're going now. Do you guys think about this for a second? You and I go up on these Egged tour buses, you know, on those roads that go up from the Galilee to the Golan Heights. You know how we're going like 10 miles an hour and your ear is popping? You know, and then sometimes you get like a cowboy Israeli driver. Not that you've never seen one of those before, right? He's going 25 miles an hour and your ear is popping. These boys, these soldiers, they were going climbing a mountain. They were going scaling a mountain with how many kilos on their back? There were no roads. These guys throughout the night, throughout the dark, the crack of dawn is when they get up there. The second bloodiest battle in the whole war were those bunkers. You had the Syrians there. You had the Russian trainers there. It was really, really bloody. And we lost a lot of boys Friday morning. But for 19 years, it was those very bunkers that made life not livable in the northern Galilee. And these guys knew they were dying. These Jewish boys knew they were giving their lives for the Jewish people, for the Jews of the Galilee and the Jews of Israel. And they won. With their lives, they cleared out those bunkers. A lot of Syrian deaths and a lot of Israeli deaths. The surviving members said, our friends didn't just sacrifice their wives, their children, their future. They didn't just sacrifice for 50 or 70 meters of bunkers on the ridge of the Golan Heights. Oh, no, no, no. We're going forward. Whether Dayan gives us the troops or not, we're moving forward. Next miracle. We're talking Friday midday. Syria, the exact same thing that happened on Wednesday here in Jerusalem. Damascus is maybe 55, 60 kilometers away. The Syrians call back their soldiers. The Israelis are here. They've conquered the Golan. Get retreat. You got to defend the capital. They're 5 hours, 4 hours. No, they're not. They're 3 hours away from the capital. Retreat and defend the capital. Guys, the next miracle. Instead of us having to fight for every inch and every foot, are you kidding me? They retracted. It was wide open. The Golan Heights, they get as far as Quneitra. This whole area. We learn about Og Melech HaBashan. This is Og Melech HaBashan all over again. Friday night, the Soviets have been humiliated because now the word's getting back to them. Not only did they lose Egypt, now they've lost a ton of equipment and they've lost a ton of land in Syria. The Soviet Union announces, Ad Kan, no, it didn't say it this way, Ad Kan Hakafa Aleph. Enough of the shenanigans. We are coming in. We're sending our naval bombers, those big ships with the aircraft. We're coming into the Mediterranean. We're going to put an end to this. We are joining this war. It's one thing to fight the Syrians. It's another thing to fight the Soviet Empire. Lyndon Baines Johnson, with 3 words. Remember we had 3 words before, Harabayit B'Yadenu? With 3 words, President Johnson changed the relationship of the United States of America to Israel forever since that time. What were those 3 words? He hears. And remember, not only the Republicans didn't want it, his own Democrats didn't want a second Vietnam. His own cabinet said, we can't do this. This is suicide. This will kill us in the elections, and this is getting us into a mess we can never get out of. President Lyndon Baines Johnson gets on the phone to the Admiral of the United States Navy. I apologize that I forgot his name. He says to the Admiral, this is the Commander-in-Chief. This is your President, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Admiral, where is the United States 6th Naval Fleet? Admiral responds, Commander-in-Chief, President, the 6th Naval Fleet is 200 kilometers off of Cyprus. The President says, Admiral, turn it around. Did you hear me? Turn it around and send it to the Haifa port. With those 3 words, America became not just a friend with words, but in actions, a partner with the State of Israel. Now, we don't know what would have happened. We don't know what the Soviets were going to do. We don't know what America was going to do. But he tells the world he is sending the 6th Naval Fleet, the most powerful naval bombers with aircraft in the world. He's sending the Haifa port to defend Israel against the Russians. What they didn't announce was they got on a phone to Israel. Okay, guys, stop with the games. We played tough. We're backing you. You're not starting World War III. There's been a good week for you Jews. It's been a wonderful week. Say Yasher Koach, thank you, enough, Dayenu. I mean, he didn't say it that way, but we ain't going to start World War III on this thing. So they said, can you get Arthur Goldberg? Can you get the United States ambassador? Can he hold things off to 11 a.m. Shabbos morning? We're talking June 11th, Shabbos, June 11th. Can he hold it off to 11 a.m., which is what? 6 p.m. here. But there's a few strategic points we need to get to, just to get safety, to get security. So, all right, no games. Don't start telling us, well, the Syrians were shooting at us, and this one was doing that, and the Arabs were doing this. 6 p.m. is 6 p.m. Moshe Dayan gets on the phone to Dado Elazar. He says, Dado, you got the 3 p.m. I don't care what the Syrians are doing to us. No, not one bullet is going to be shot from a Jewish gun. Not one bullet shot from an Israeli-held gun, okay? 3 p.m. Okay, you got all day till 3 p.m. Do what you have to do whatever you can do, but not a thing after that. Why did he tell him 3 p.m. when it was 6 p.m.? Guys, it's like, you tell a rabbi you got 15 minutes. Yeah, oh, that means 47 minutes. You know what I'm saying? You tell a Jewish soldier he's got till 3 p.m. He doesn't want World War III. America's done what it's done. He doesn't want World War III. If he tells him 3 p.m. and it goes over an hour and a half, at least they're within the ceasefire. 2:45 p.m. An Israeli flag is stuck in the Hermon mountain. Not so you can go on a ski vacation when you have Beinas Manim from Netiv Aryeh. That's not why they did that. Why? Remember when the Syrians choked us off? The one source of natural water was the Kinneret. Where does that water come? The water for this Jewish state comes from the melting snow and the melting ice of the Hermon mountain. The war was over in 6 days. Remember that little country that was 9 miles wide at its shortest point? Do you understand? You could get up on the mountains, the Shomron Mountains, a Palestinian terrorist with an RPG, a handheld RPG on his shoulder, could take a plane landing into Ben Gurion. Then it was called Lod Airport. You could have taken down a plane. Not anymore. For the first time in the history of the state of Israel, it's defensible borders. Guys, you're sitting here, and this I heard from Bibi Netanyahu in an interview. The Mekomos HaKadoshim, Yerushalayim, Beis Lechem, Hebron, Shechem. None of that. It was always Israel, Israel. It became the Jewish nation. Jewish history, where Tanakh, where Chazal, where they lived, where they established our whole Masorah. Once again, it's ours. One of the programs we run is a birthright. I didn't talk about that the other morning. We took 2,800 kids this year in Israel. Most of them don't have a Hebrew name. Most of them never had a bar bat mitzvah. Do you know what the game changer is on their trip, on their birthright trip? You know what the highlight? They all write it because they have to fill out these forms. It's always Friday night at the hotel and then having a meal with the family here in Yerushalayim. Look at Netiv Aryeh. The Ir Atikah is Yeshiva row, is seminary row. Do you know how many people came with no background on a federation trip? They came on a trip to Israel, and that experience coming to Yerushalayim changed their life. You know how many Bali Tshuva were changed? Something else, guys. One of the people I interviewed was Natan Sharansky. You know what he said? And this is very important. Because the ramification of this were 1 million people who were still Jews that came here and settled, and will be Jews because they settled here. He says in 1967, let me tell you one thing. We hated ourselves. We were self-hating and self-loathing Russians. You know what? We didn't know what it meant to be a Jew. We had no idea. All we knew is they put on our identity card an I, a big I, Ivri. Like from Ivri. Ivri. And they mocked us. You couldn't get anywhere in academia. You couldn't get anywhere in military. You couldn't get anywhere in any society if you had that big I on your identity card. And we hated ourselves. He says, before that war, we assumed all the nonsense about Israel was Soviet propaganda. Until I remember one night they screened on the TVs the Jews in Israel digging sandbags and building bunkers. Then we knew whoever these Jews are, whatever Judaism stands for, they were in trouble. And after the war, when they had bragged how they were going to show the great Soviet military might, and you know what happened? They hated us even worse. Oh, were they furious? Oh, were they embarrassed? Oh, were they humiliated? And they hated us. And the discrimination was worse. But you know what the difference was? For the first time ever, they respected us. And they respected tiny little Israel and that little Jewish nation. And he says, when they started to respect the Jews, it was the first time in our life we started to respect ourselves. When we started to respect ourselves, we wanted to know more about Judaism. That's when the Hebrew classes, that's when the private minyanim, that's when the Chumash classes, the Talmud classes, that's when the whole desire to apply to immigrate to Zion, to immigrate to Israel. He says, when Glasnost and Perestroika came in 1990, there wouldn't have been Russian Jews left. They would have been so far gone. The whole revolution of what we call the Soviet Jewry movement that brought 150,000 to Germany, that brought 200,000 to North America, that brought 1 million here, who are living as Jews, most of them, that was all a function of the Six-Day War. Guys, in the United States, look at yourselves. Because your peers in 1967, no one walked around with a yarmulke. The only one who wore a yarmulke was a Satmar Chassid in Williamsburg. You think anybody would walk with a yarmulke? They were afraid to walk with a yarmulke. You didn't do that. Don't look for trouble. It's about frum people. It's about seriously religious people. You know when the Jews started wearing a yarmulke in the United States? After the Six-Day War. You know the Baal Tshuva movement in the United States? Today, very important to know this, today out of every 100 Orthodox Jews in the United States, 29 didn't grow up in an Orthodox home. 12 in a conservative home, 8 in a reform home, 8 in an unaffiliated home. You know what most of the Bali Tshuva became Bali Tshuva? It was the hero Tshuva caused by the Six-Day War. American Jewry is what it is because of that event. Let me tell you something else, guys. And ask your grandparents, those of you who have grandparents still alive that are survivors. The survivors after the war, they were very bitter. They were very mad. In their mind, God had taken away their parents, God had taken away their children, their siblings, God had taken away everything. And on the one hand, they were Jews by default because they had no choice but to be Jews. But they were mad at Judaism, they were mad at religion, and mad at their Almighty. After those 6 days, guys, and I heard this from many, many survivors, they realized God had not abandoned the Jewish people. There was a God in the world. And there was a God in the world who looked after his people and his nation. And those survivors, the rapprochement, started after 67. And it affected the way they raised their children. And it affected the way they lived as Jews. And they started to come back to the Torah. They started coming back to Yiddishkeit and to the Ribono Shel Olam. I've heard Rabbi Soloveitchik say, he had a beard, he wore a hat. He would take the train from Boston to New York. And the missionaries, he was an easy target because he looked like a Jew. They would always give him a hard time. You stiff-necked people. Am Kashay Oreg, the stiff-necked people. Don't you see, hasn't the empirical evidence that 6 million of you died, isn't that enough of a reason to know? Because you abandoned and you rejected our Christ and our Savior, and you left and you refused to accept him as the truth. God has abandoned you. God has rejected you. When will you stop with your obstinate ways? When will the truth of history speak to you? He says, after the Six-Day War, when all the Christian holy sites were now under the control of the Jews, when all the words of the prophets, after 2 millennia, the only time in the annals of all of human history, the only time in the annals of all of human history that a refugee people had returned to its ancestral homeland, they still worked, the missionaries. The missionaries were still trying to convert us. But that stupid empirical argument that they would make, that Calvinistic tit-for-tat mentality, it was out the window. Because that was their biggest argument. They couldn't use it anymore. Because now, their own people, and you see that today in the evangelicals, are reading Yeshaya and Zechariah and Yechezkel and Yirmiyahu, the Pashut Pshat, the way it was meant to be read. Not the way the Catholics had perverted it. And corrupted it to make it fit into Catholic theology. All of that, and much, much more, are ramification. Israel is safe. Israel is not in any way, shape, out of the woods. But it's a viable nation that is defendable with the chesed of the Ribono Shel Olam. It's no longer 9 miles wide. And I'm going to ask you one thing, guys. I don't know why Hashem gave us life in this generation, why you and I are living here, why we're learning in Netiv Aryeh, looking at the Kosel Ma'aravi. Our great-grandparents, for Dorei Doros, dreamed of this, hallucinated of this, that there would be 8.4 million people in this land, 75% of them Jews. And by the way, without the Six-Day War, there's no way we could have gone from 2 million to 8.4 million. There were 2 million Christians, Jews, and Muslims then. You and I, we live in this point in history where we've come home, where we're learning Torah, where we're doing mitzvahs, where we're encountering the Nevi'im, we're encountering the Chazal here in Yerushalayim, the first time in 2,000 years. God gave us this gift. It's the biggest gift in the world that we're partaking in this moment in history. That we're actors on the Ribono Shel Olam stage. That we're witnesses to the Yad Hashem. I'm going to ask you one thing. And then I want everybody to have a good lunch for Yom Yerushalayim. But I want to ask you one thing. You guys say Modim Anachnu Lach 3 times a day. I'm going to ask you this. Dip a little lower when you say Modim Anachnu Lach, and thank the Ribono Shel Olam that you and I, for whatever reason, had the schus of coming to learn Torah in Yerushalayim, live in Yerushalayim, and be part of a nation that after being refugees, after being oppressed, victimized, downtrodden, despised, pariahs, for 2,000 years, Hashem enabled us to come here. This guy's wearing a Buffalo Bills shirt, and he's not being attacked for wearing a Buffalo Bills shirt, learning Torah in the base medrash. I could never have dreamed of such a thing. And you and I can do that here in Yerushalayim. What a schus, and what a day, and what a generation, and what a world you and I live in. Thank Hashem for the nisim and niflos that this nation has not experienced, not since Hanukkah, maybe not since Yetzias Mitzrayim. Chag Sameach, a wonderful day, a wonderful zman, shtai goyis, and Masechta Sotah. Thank you.